Welcome to the Psychology World podcast. I'm Connor Whiteley, bringing you psychology news, articles, and other interesting psychology-related articles. You can find the podcast notes and more interesting psychology-related things, and you can get your free 8 psychology book box set at connorwhiteley.net. Now let's get on to the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 82 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on what causes a schizophrenia, which is taken from a chapter out of my brand new book, At Normal Psychology, The Causes and Treatments of Depression, Anxiety, and More. Third edition, which I really recommend, but I'll talk about that later. And it is Friday, the 2nd of April 2021 as I record this, and no, I cannot believe that the first quarter of the year has already gone by. So today's episode I have really enjoyed, and hopefully you will find it really useful. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest, and there's actually some really interesting articles, because there's a first one that ties into the research I'm going to be doing on my placement later this year. So the first one is, people with depression show hints of distorted thinking in the language they use on their social media. A key facet of a cognitive behavioural therapy is challenging cognitive distortions, inaccurate thought patterns that often affect those with depression. Such distortions can include jumping to conclusions, catastrophizing, black and white thinking, or self-blame, and can cause sincere distress to those experiencing them. But how do we track cognitive distortions in those with depression outside of self-reporting? A new study published in Natural Human Behavior explores cognitive distortions on the line, finding that those with depressions have high levels of distortion in the language that they use on social media. This, I think, is really interesting though, because I always think it's really good to when we find a new way to research something and collect data, because as we all know, the problem with self-reported data is, well, it's self-reported, it's open to bias, but this way of researching is actually potentially a lot better, because it really does reduce the bias. Of course, the only concern would be privacy concerns and getting informed consent, but I'm sure that the researchers would have thought of that. But I guess a potential takeaway from this psychology news article, yes, I almost forgot what to call it then, is that if we read something and we think it's a bit strange, maybe just think to ourselves and go, is that person okay? Is my friend in trouble? Do they need help? And just, I don't know, really, not official advice, it's just a thought. Okay, so frequent workplace interruptions are annoying, but may also help you feel that you belong. So, workplace disruptions during the COVID-19 pandemic aren't quite what they used to be. Now that you're more likely to be interrupted by a cat jumping on your keyboard or the partner trying to make a cup of tea while you're in a meeting. But if you can cast your mind back at what it was like to work in an office, perhaps you can recall how annoying it was to be disturbed by colleagues dropping by with questions or comments. These workplace intrusions used to be common in offices, and no doubt will be again. There's certainly plenty of evidence that may interfere with our ability to complete tasks, and that we can find them stressful. However, no one's really considered the potential benefits. Note the authors of a new paper, who reported that there is a dark side to these interruptions, but there's also a bright side too. So this I can actually really understand though, because I read the research paper a bit more though, and I really can understand it, because if people were coming at you, want to talk to you, ask questions, then this shows that they trust you, they believe in you, and all of that really positive stuff that means that we are valued within the social group. So this is really good, and I definitely understand where the research is coming from. But in the real world, it's still annoying. Okay then, students who want to cut down on their drinking often feel forced to compromise for social connection. Drinking culture is a huge part of a university, with Freshers' Week events often revolving near exclusively around getting drunk, and that's what I hated about Freshers' Week. I think it was so pointless, because there was nothing for me to do. A 2018 survey from the National Unions of Students found that 76% of our respondents felt an expectation for students to drink to get drunk, and 79% agreed that drinking and getting drunk is a key part of the university culture. This isn't for everyone, however. A quick search of student forums will show many young people pre-university anxious about a drinking culture that they don't want to participate in. Now, a new study has found that taking a closer look at students' decisions to reduce alcohol consumption and what prevents them from doing so. So, I don't really want to talk about the article itself, but I really just want to talk about the whole drinking culture. And I really agree with this because I really did not like Freshers Week because there was absolutely nothing to do for the people who didn't want to drink. And I felt that was such a shame because there was just nothing for me to do, because there was no way to actually go out and meet people except drinking, which I did not want to do. So I think that was a massive shame when it comes to university. And if you actually look at this article in like a more depth, though, tons of students feel I feel like they have to drink and they have to go out partying, otherwise they're going to be outcast or shunted by the social group and like all of the other like social psychology bits. So I really hope that you enjoyed the psychology news section. Let's move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. So this week has been really busy with university stuff and also on the writing front, but I'm not going to talk too much about it. We'll talk about it that much though. But when you listen to this week though, I have 2 statistics exams. So I've been doing lots of statistics revision this week, and I also had lots of questions. So I sort of wrote out tons of answers, and then I was looking at it. And I'm thinking, right, for me to become really engaged with it, I'm going to have to do something for you guys. So, by the time that you listen to this, if you go to connorwiley.net /, psychology statistics, I'm not sure on what I'm going to name it yet. There will be a full web page of statistics, questions, and all of the answers. Though, if you know anyone who struggles with statistics and they want a few answers and they want a really easy to understand answer, please direct them there. This is not self-promotional at the slightest. It's just that this is the stuff that I struggled with. I threw in a few basic ones, but this is the stuff that I struggled with this week, and I really want to help other people with psychology statistics, because there's even one question there that now I think is so simple, and most of you are probably going to laugh at me when I tell you what it is, but I had no idea how to do it. So that's for example, this week in my revision, I was asked to compute a variable in SPS. Now, most of you will probably know how to do that. I had no idea, so I watched a YouTube video. And all that you need to do is that you just need to go to the Transform tab on the top bar of SPSS and click on the compute variable bit. So I was slightly embarrassed, but I was just laughing though. Laughing though. But if you struggle with statistics, then please go to that web page. Hopefully it will help you. Okay, and then the only other thing that I wanted to mention though about this week, and this is actually the sponsored product section of today's episode, is Normal Psychology, Causes and Treatments of Depression, Anxiety and More. Third edition is being released today, so I'm really happy with this book. I'm amazed and I'm so humbled that so many people have pre-ordered it. Thank you so much. It's just such a great book that I really love it because it really breaks down depression, schizophrenia, anxiety and so many other mental health conditions into really easy to understand pieces that people really enjoy though. And it also goes into diagnosis, the history of mental health, and also the biological, social and the cognitive factors of all of these mental conditions. So I cannot recommend this book enough. I loved it. People will love the second edition, but this is only building upon it. So I cannot recommend this book enough, especially if you love mental health, clinical psychology. So I really enjoyed it, and hopefully you will too. So that is Normal Psychology, the causes and treatments of depression, anxiety and more. And you can get the ebook on all major ebook retailers. You can get the hardback print book and the larger print edition from Amazon or your local bookstore. And you can get the ebook and any of the print books for free at your local library if you request them. And as always, I love to know your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwiley@connorwiley.net. You can always leave a comment at the show notes at to connorwhiteley.net/podcast, and you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi-whiteley. So that's enough of the personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about what causes schizophrenia. But this is going to be a short little section though, because I sort of thought that this podcast episode could sort of serve like double duty for me. So I'm recording the main content part of today's episode as a part of the audiobook, because give me the incentive though to produce these audiobooks like a bit sooner, because I self-narrate my own like non-fiction. So I really hope that you enjoy today's episode, and then I'm going to quickly pop in at the end of today's episode. So enjoy. Chapter 10. What causes schizophrenia? There are lots of different causes of schizophrenia, and there is no one cause, so everything below, for lack of a better term, interacts together to create the condition. The dopamine hypothesis. This hypothesis was proposed by Meltzer and Stahl in 1976, and they thought schizophrenia was caused by excessive levels of dopamine synapses in certain areas of the brain. This, I think, is interesting, since we tend to associate dopamine with positive behaviours, so the thought that dopamine can do us harm is weird at first. Yet in biological psychology, I discuss how much damage various neurotransmitters can do to us. So this hypothesis is interesting to say the least. Furthermore, this hypothesis is supported by several key pieces of evidence. For example, drugs that provoke a similar state to schizophrenia, like methamphetamines, increase stimulation of dopamine synapses, Martinez et al. 2007, meaning there's a link between stimulation and the synapses and schizophrenia. Additionally, drugs that alleviate schizophrenia block postsynaptic dopamine receptors, Darlinas and Shankar 2016, and drugs that are most effective at blocking dopamine receptors are also the most effective against schizophrenia. Overall, this evidence provides good evidence for this theory, and I quite like the hypothesis since it's logical and it makes sense. However, there is evidence against the hypothesis, such as drugs that block postsynaptic dopamine receptors don't always alleviate schizophrenia for patients, and there are inconsistent results about the measurements of dopamine or its metabolites. On the whole, I want to add that this hypothesis is quite good, but it's similar to the serotonin hypothesis in depression, because it's just a biological factor, and it doesn't take all the cognitive or social factors into account. The glycomate hypothesis. Another biological hypothesis for the causes of schizophrenia is the glucamate hypothesis, proposed by Morgendam and Javid 2012. This proposes schizophrenia is partially caused by a lack of glucamate activity. This is a problem because glucamate inhibits dopamine release, so this hypothesis builds upon the dopamine hypothesis and explains why the excessive dopamine levels occur. Saying that, the lack of glucamate activity occurs because phencyclidine blocks the glucamate synapses, preventing it from being released into the synaptic gap. Murray 2002, as well as schizophrenia, is associated with lower than normal release of glucamate and fewer receptors in the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus. Harrison et al. 2003, leading to this interaction of both positive and negative symptoms of schizophrenia, especially in people already predisposed to the condition. Overall, I believe these two hypotheses largely build upon one another, and these are good explanations for the biological explanations of schizophrenia. Genetic and prenatal factors. For a long time, schizophrenia has been known to run in families, as supported by Andreas and Black 1996, as it's found that a sibling of a person with schizophrenia is 4 times more likely to develop schizophrenia than the general population. Nevertheless, there are always problems with research. However, whilst the evidence above could be perceived to be down to environmental factors, the results from a twin study show that the likelihood of identical twins developing schizophrenia if the other twin has it is between 41% to 65% and 6 to 28% for non-identical twins. Cardo and Gossman 2000. In addition, genetics aren't the only possible cause of schizophrenia, as prenatal influences during a pregnancy can cause schizophrenia as well, such as prenatal influences include a diminished supply of oxygen to the brain, as well as a number of prenatal infections can contribute to schizophrenia. Furthermore, the evidence suggests that schizophrenia is a neurodevelopmental disorder, meaning that from a young age, the brain doesn't develop as it's meant to. Also, this means that schizophrenia could be detected in early adulthood. Finally, stress is another contributing factor to the development of schizophrenia, as explained in the introduction. Stress can trigger a genetic deposition to cause a condition. This explains the higher prevalence of schizophrenia in people with a lower socioeconomic status. Other biological causes of schizophrenia include poor nutrition for mother, extreme maternal stress during pregnancy, season of birth effect, viral infections and influenza, premature birth, lower birth weight, and complications in delivery. Neurodevelopmental hypothesis. In addition to the biological causes of this condition, a new line of thinking is starting to develop to consider there might be a neurodevelopmental cause of schizophrenia. Yet, this isn't firmly established currently. For instance, some psychologists believe damage to the infant's dorsolateral prefrontal cortex could be a factor, since at 1 year old there is little effect of the brain lesion, as well as infants perform as well as undamaged monkeys when performing tasks. However, at 2 years old, the effects of the brain lesion are clearer, and the 2-year-old infant performs a lot worse than undamaged monkeys. Hi everyone, that's like the podcast version of me sat back and not my audiobook itself though. All what I wanted to say there was that I found that really interesting was schizophrenia. It's sort of these, it's like one of these content additions that we don't yet fully understand, but there are a lot of interesting ideas, and all of these have merits though. So hopefully that's what you got out of today's episode. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode. Please check out Normal Psychology, the causes and treatments of depression, anxiety, and more. Third edition, you can get the ebook on all major ebook retailers. You can get the paperback, hardback, and the large print version from Amazon or your local bookstore. And you can get the ebook and any of the print books from your local library for free if you request it. And if you know anyone who would find today's episode useful, then please just tell them about it. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help us spread the word about the podcast. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see the show notes, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. And if you want a free 8-book psychology box set, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.